Hi everybody, this is Mr. Gillen. We're in the middle of Jacob Lawrence Migration Series website, and I wanted to show you a couple things. Yesterday we were talking about the music of World War I, and I mentioned that I thought that the growing amount of blues music and the rise of this music was less, more sort of gutty and authentic. So take a listen. This is Leadbelly. Leadbelly was a real character. Huddie Ledbetter is his name, real name. He ended up in jail a number of times for murder or manslaughter. And you may recall, so Rock Island Line is one of his most famous. He's playing a 12-string guitar. Notice the topics, right? Cotton's a big one. Many of the African Americans are so we're dealing with a transformation from a rural culture to an urban one. I mentioned the boll weevil. The boll weevil was a beetle that affected cotton crops and prevented people from being able to make a living as a sharecropper. Boll weevil here, boll weevil there, boll weevil everywhere. Boll weevil here, boll weevil everywhere. I looked in my flower bed, I found a weevil. That's some good guitar there by Pink Anderson. So I want to show you two things in this video that you might need for your web quest here. The first is, and it's not super obvious how to get to the actual images. So I'm clicking on the painting here. Jacob Lawrence was a painter, and he painted. Let's see if I can find the whole series. Yeah. So if you go to the migration series, and I'll show you how I got there again. I'm going back, and I scroll down to the very bottom. I'll put the link right to it, where it says art, and right to the migration series. And so you see, what I'd like you to do is go through chronologically and just look at each picture. So here you see people leaving during World War I. There was a great migration north, and you know that. So what are we looking at? The war caused a labor shortage in northern industry. Citizens of foreign countries were returning to their native land. So he's telling you the story. I just think this art is wonderful. You see the birds flying in the same direction. African Americans leaving. You see the sort of triangle shape there with awesome colors. From every southern town, migrants left by the hundreds to travel north. It almost looks like this guy doesn't have a head. When I first saw it, I think it's right there. All other sources of labor having been exhausted, the migrants were the last resource. Migrants were advanced passage on the railroads, paid for by Northern industry. Northern industry was to be repaid by migrants on the future wages. So you see that it takes a minute to realize that this is the chain. What's going on here? First of all, that's the train. Trains were crowded with migrants. And in each part, you can hear Jacob Lawrence talk about the panel.
Number 6 represents a train, a coach, in which people are riding, partly asleep, napping. And it's a long ride. It could be a bus, it could be a train. And it's a long, arduous ride from where these people came. I try to create a staccato-like rhythm over and over and over again, the shapes as they move. That I built on the geometry. I love it. I love the mystery of it, along with the I guess you'd call it, the figurative element and the manipulation of color, the manipulation of value, of texture. And throughout the series, I try to repeat this. And I guess my thinking was at the time.
So, how do I get out of here? So that was panel 6. So, and like I said, at every panel picture, Lawrence talks about it. He talked about, he liked that staccato, that sort of repeating patterns and color, like what's going on here. So if you just looked at this image, you probably wouldn't necessarily know what's going on. And then let's look at what he says. The migrant whose life had been rural and nurtured by the hearth was now moving to urban life dependent on industrial machinery. So I'd like you to go through each of these, every single one of these panels. It'll take a little bit, but I think it'll be worth it, and it tells the story. Here you have some left because of promises of work in the north, others left because their farms have been devastated by floods. And then obviously a picture of the flood. So who is Jacob Lawrence? As the text says here, more than 75 years ago, a young artist named Jacob Lawrence set to work on an ambitious 60-panel series portraying the Great Migration, the flight of 1 million African Americans from the rural South to the industrial North following the outbreak of World War I. By Lawrence's own admission, this was a broad and complex subject to tackle and paint, one never before attempted in the visual arts. Yet Lawrence had spent the past 3 years addressing similar themes of struggle, hope, triumphs, and adversity in his narrative portraits of the lives of Harriet Tubman, leader of the Underground Railroad, Frederick Douglass, abolitionist, and Toussaint Louverture, liberator of Haiti. So I'm going to skip here down to following the example of the West African storyteller, or griot, who spins tales of the past with meaning for the present and future. Lawrence tells a story that reminds us of our shared history, at the same time invites us to reflect on the universal theme of struggle in the world today. To me, migration means movement. There was a conflict and struggle, but out of the struggle came a kind of power and even beauty. So I think that's really cool. I want to show you also the map of the migration, so you get a sense of what that looks like. And when I went to Mississippi to study the migration, to study I went to the Mississippi Delta. Here's Mississippi. I took an Uber, and my Uber driver was telling me about his family in Chicago, and it brought home to life this whole idea of the migration, and the migration taking very distinct patterns. I understood that people came north, but what I didn't really understand is that people follow the railroad lines. So people from Mississippi, generally speaking, went to Chicago, sometimes Memphis. People from Alabama could veer off towards Detroit or move to Chicago. You see people, even going to Pittsburgh from Georgia and or Alabama. And so this is, to me, a really interesting map, sort of super interactive. Note just an incredible increase of African Americans. In 1920, black residents of St. Louis, born in Arkansas, 3,000. Born in Mississippi, 16,000. By 1970, those numbers dramatically increased. In Chicago, look at that, 372,000 residents of Chicago were born in Mississippi in 1970. And one of the things that the map shows you is there's something called reverse migration, and that is in the 1980s to 2010, African Americans came back home, went back south, and again, this is often to look for jobs. So when I click on migration map, it tells us between 1910 and 1970, more than 5 million blacks left the South for major cities in the North and West, including Pittsburgh, New York, Detroit, Chicago, St. Louis, and Los Angeles. These departures were fueled in part by the availability of low-skilled jobs in the burgeoning manufacturing industry. So, cool stuff. What you're going to do is you are going to map out and discuss the migration series from Jacob Lawrence. And I hope you enjoy it. I think you will find that you were able to spend some time looking at these images.